James Dawson sat on a stone bench in the middle of San Francisco, watching the busy streets around him. People moved quickly, their faces serious, their eyes lost in thought. Some were talking on their phones, others were rushing from one place to another, and no one seemed to notice anyone else. Life kept going, and James knew that it never stopped for anyone. Not for him, not for anyone. He let out a deep sigh, rubbing his rough hands together. He had lived a long life, full of lessons, full of struggles. His hands, once strong and steady, had seen better days. Once upon a time, he had been a skilled mechanic, fixing cars with ease. But now, he was just another man sitting on a bench, watching the world pass him by. As he sat there, lost in his thoughts, a strange noise interrupted the usual hum of the city. It was the sound of a car engine, one that didn't sound right. It stuttered and coughed as if it was struggling to stay alive. James looked up, curious. His eyes scanned the street until he spotted a luxury car parked near the curb. It was a car he had only ever seen in magazines, sleek, expensive, and way out of his league. Next to the car, a short man paced back and forth, clearly frustrated. James squinted, trying to get a better look. The man looked familiar, though James couldn't immediately place him. Something about the way he moved, the way he held himself, felt oddly recognizable. Then, as the man turned slightly, the realization hit James like a shock of cold water. It was Lionel Messi. What the hell is he doing here? James thought, his mind struggling to connect the dots. Messi, one of the greatest soccer players of all time, was standing just a few feet away, looking completely out of place in the middle of a San Francisco street with a broken car. For a moment, James just watched, wondering if he was imagining things. But no, this was real. Driven by a mix of curiosity and his natural instinct to help, James stood up and walked over. "Need some help?" he asked, his voice calm and steady. Messi looked up, surprised. His eyes quickly scanned James as if trying to decide if he could trust the stranger. "I don't know," Messi admitted, running a hand through his hair. "It's complicated." James glanced at the car, then back at Messi. A small smile appeared on his face. "Don't worry. I worked as a mechanic for almost 30 years before life took me down a different path." Messi hesitated for a moment, then nodded, stepping aside. "If you think you can fix it, please do. I don't want to be a bother." James crouched down, peering under the hood. The car was high-tech, far more advanced than the ones he used to work on, but some things never changed. An engine was an engine. From his pocket, James pulled out an old wire and a small, worn-out piece of electrical tape. These weren't the fancy tools that modern mechanics used, but they would do. His hands, despite their age, moved with confidence and precision. Messi watched in silence, impressed by the way James worked. He had met many skilled people in his life, athletes, coaches, trainers, but there was something different about this man. There was experience in his hands, wisdom in his eyes. After a few minutes, James tightened one last wire and stepped back. He wiped his hands on his pants and nodded toward Messi. "Try it now." Messi got into the car and turned the key. The engine roared to life, smooth and steady. Messi's eyes widened in shock. "That was incredible," he said, stepping out of the car. "Please let me pay you for this." James immediately shook his head. "No need," he said simply. Messi hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small card. "Here," he said, holding it out. "Come to this address tomorrow. It's not charity, it's an opportunity." James frowned, taking the card between his rough fingers. Messi's words sounded honest, and for some reason, James believed him. "I'll think about it," James said, slipping the card into his jacket pocket. Without another word, he turned and walked away. Messi watched him go, feeling a strange mix of admiration and curiosity. As James disappeared into the crowd, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had just changed. Maybe, just maybe, life still had something in store for him. The next day, James found himself standing outside the building written on Messi's card. It was tall, sleek, and modern, with glass walls that reflected the city. A small sign near the entrance read Foundation Messi. James took a deep breath and adjusted his old jacket. He had worn this jacket for years. It had frayed edges and patches where the fabric had worn thin. He wasn't used to places like this. Still, something in his gut told him to go inside. His footsteps echoed loudly as he walked through the entrance. A young woman at the front desk looked up and smiled. "Are you James Dawson?" she asked. "Yeah," James replied, his voice cautious. "Please follow me. They're expecting you." She led him down a long hallway lined with photos. They were pictures of Messi, holding trophies, celebrating with teammates, hugging his family. Each image told a story of success, of dedication, of never giving up. James felt like he didn't belong here. Finally, they reached a large, comfortable-looking room. A small group of people stood inside. A man with neatly combed gray hair stepped forward and extended his hand. "Mr. Dawson, it's a pleasure to meet you. I'm Marco, the director of the Messi Foundation." James shook his hand but said nothing. "Lionel told us about you," Marco continued, "and he asked us to do something special." "Special?" James repeated, his voice skeptical. Marco gestured for him to sit. James noticed that everyone in the room was looking at him, but their eyes weren't judging. They were curious. "Lionel was impressed by what you did yesterday," Marco said. "Not just fixing the car but the way you carried yourself. He believes you have knowledge that is invaluable." James frowned. "So what's the catch?" Marco smiled and placed a folder in front of him. "We're launching a program to help people like you, veterans, workers who have struggled to find their place again." James slowly opened the folder. "But that's not all," Marco continued. "Lionel also suggested something else. He thinks you'd be perfect as a technical consultant for a new project. We're creating tools to help mechanics like you, people with real hands-on experience." James blinked. "A consultant?" "Yes. Your expertise would be invaluable." James drummed his fingers on the table, thinking. "Why me?" Marco's expression was kind. "Because we believe in second chances. And because Lionel is convinced you can make a difference." James let out a small, doubtful laugh. "This sounds too good to be true." Marco pulled out a small set of keys and placed them on the table. "This is real. These keys are for an apartment, a place for you to start fresh." James stared at them. "We've also cleared your medical debts," Marco added. Lionel insisted. James's breath caught in his throat. His tough exterior cracked just a little. Slowly he picked up the keys, gripping them tightly. "What do you want me to do?" he asked softly. Marco smiled. "Just be yourself, James. That's all we ask. Just do what you do best. Work hard and share what you know. The rest, we'll figure it out together." James nodded slowly. He felt thankful, but at the same time he couldn't believe what was happening. Was this real? After everything he had been through, after years of struggling, could things really change? For the first time in a long time he felt hope. The next few months were full of changes for James Dawson. What started as a simple act of kindness turned into a new life, one he never thought possible. On his first day at the Messi Foundation, James put his whole heart into his work. His new job was as a technical consultant, which meant helping engineers design tools for mechanics. At first, he worried that he wouldn't fit in. After all, he had only worked in small car repair shops. But soon he realized that his experience was exactly what the team needed. James had spent years fixing cars, getting his hands dirty, and solving problems that computers couldn't. He might not have known about fancy technology, but he understood machines in a way that textbooks couldn't teach. He worked closely with a group of engineers. They talked about sensors, computer codes, and complicated formulas, but when something didn't make sense, James stepped in with practical advice. One afternoon, during a meeting, James picked up a wrench and pointed at a machine they were building. "This design is good," he said, "but you're making it too complicated. A regular mechanic won't even know where to start." The engineers looked at each other. James's voice was strong but not rude. "Why don't we make it simpler?" he continued. "Just a few clear buttons. Easier is always better." A young engineer named Diego smiled. "He's right. This will make it easier for mechanics everywhere to use." Marco, the team leader, nodded. "That's why you're here, James. We need your experience." For the first time in years, James felt useful. People were listening to him. He wasn't just another worker. He was part of something bigger. Even though James had a new job and a new life, he never forgot where he came from. He remembered the nights he had spent hungry, the times he had slept in the cold, and the feeling of having nothing. When he got his first paycheck, the first thing he did was pay his overdue bills. But after that, he wanted to do something more. He went to a store and bought several boxes of granola bars. Every week, he went back to his old neighborhood, where he had once struggled, and handed out food to people in need. One evening, as he was giving out the bars, he stopped in front of a man wrapped in a thin, worn-out blanket. The man sat on the sidewalk, shivering. James crouched down and handed him a granola bar. "What's your name?" James asked. "Miguel," the man replied, taking the bar with trembling hands. James sat beside him. "Miguel, I don't know what you're going through, but I do know one thing: things can change. I promise." At first, Miguel looked doubtful, like he had heard those words before. But when he looked into James's eyes, he saw something different. James wasn't just saying words, he meant them. It was a small act of kindness, But James knew that even small things could make a big difference. One afternoon, James was deep in his work, adjusting a prototype in the workshop. He was so focused that he didn't hear footsteps behind him. "How's everything going, James?" James looked up and saw Lionel Messi standing in the doorway. He was dressed casually, but his presence filled the room. "Lionel," James said, smiling as he wiped his hands on a rag. "Better than I ever imagined." Messi walked over and looked at the machine James was working on. "What is it?" "It's a tool that helps mechanics find problems in modern cars," James explained. "It's simple but really useful." Messi studied the device and nodded. "I never thought something like this could exist." James chuckled. "I never thought I'd get another chance, but here I am." Messi looked at him seriously but warmly. "James, you taught me something important," he said. "The biggest changes start with the smallest acts of kindness." James felt those words deep in his heart. "Maybe," he replied, "but you gave me the chance to make that kindness grow." They exchanged smiles, a quiet understanding of how life had brought them together in the most unexpected way. James had now become more than just a worker, he was a mentor. He helped new people who joined the Messi Foundation, teaching them not just about machines, but also about believing in themselves. 1 year after his life changed, James returned to his old neighborhood. The streets looked the same, but he had changed. He carried a bag filled with granola bars, bottles of water, and canned food. Helping others wasn't just something he did, it was part of who he was now. As he walked, he noticed a young man sitting on the sidewalk. The boy looked lost, hugging an old backpack like it was his only comfort. James recognized that look. It was the same one he had once worn. He approached carefully, not wanting to startle him. "Hey, buddy," James said gently, pulling out a granola bar. "Are you hungry?" The young man looked up, his eyes filled with sadness and doubt. "A little," he mumbled, taking the bar hesitantly. James sat beside him and set his bag on the ground. "I used to be just like you," he said, his voice calm. "I know it's hard to believe, but things can change." The young man let out a bitter laugh. "And what do you know about that?" James smiled, not out of amusement but because he understood. "I know more than you think. 1 year ago I was sitting right here, not knowing what I would do next. But someone helped me and that changed everything." The boy looked at him, curious but still unsure. "What did you do?" James pointed at his bag. "First I accepted the help. Then I worked hard to give back." As James shared his story, he thought about Messi's kindness and how it had started a chain reaction. The Messi Foundation had now expanded, helping people in other countries. One small moment had turned into something much bigger. Every now and then, James and Messi would meet at the foundation. One day, Messi smiled and said, "Do you realize all of this started with a broken-down engine?" James laughed. "And a little bit of duct tape." It was their way of remembering that big changes can start from the smallest moments. Back on the sidewalk, James pulled out a small card and handed it to the young man. "If you ever need help, here's my number," he said. "And if someone helps you one day, don't forget to help someone else." The young man hesitated but took the card. "Thanks, I guess." James stood up, picking up his bag. "You don't have to believe me now," he said. "Just remember, things can change." With those words, James walked away, leaving behind more than just food. He had left a seed of hope. Every year, James took time to remember the day his life changed. He didn't throw a party. He didn't make a big deal out of it. He simply took a moment to be grateful. He had learned something important. Kindness is like a well-tuned engine. It keeps moving, passing from one person to another, connecting lives in ways no one ever expects. And so, the cycle continued. If you enjoyed this story, share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories filled with adventure, mystery, and excitement. Your support means the world, and it helps keep these stories coming. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.